Hello everybody, I'm Carly from the main group. My pronouns are she, her and hers. We're really delighted to be joined today by Lee from Changing Hearts and Minds. Hello Lee, good to see you.
Hello, great to see you, Carly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're really excited that we're celebrating LGBT History Month, and we are going to be having a really good look at the background of that and also what workplaces can be doing to support our LGBT plus colleagues. So what I wanted to start with was just by introducing a poll that we've got today. So the poll here is to ask a little bit about everyone who's in the room. How well do you feel that your workplace supports LGBT plus colleagues? And then the options there, you can click on which you think is most relevant to you, and then we can have a discussion around that at the end. And as always, there's a chat function, and it would be great to keep it interactive and for everybody to put any questions that they've got in the chat as we go along, and I can put those questions to Lee for you. But I thought it would be great to get started. Lee, if you wouldn't mind, just by telling us, first of all, just a little bit about Changing Hearts and Minds and the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lee Thomas-Wragg. My pronouns are he, him, they. And I'm the founder of Changing Hearts and Minds Consulting Limited, which actually we just celebrate 1 year of logging on Companies House this month. So it's a year that we've been in operation. And I think the main reason I created Changing Hearts and Minds was that I could see that obviously organizations adhere to legislation outlined in the Equalities Act. But unless you have allies in a business, and that's for all minority groups, that legislation is not enough. You have to have the hearts and minds of the workforce. And legislation comes and goes. It can change dependent on what politicians have what power. But if we've got true allies, then regardless of that legislation, we have people that will always be by our sides and support and speak out in the face of social injustices. So in addition to offering guidance to employers around allyship, I also have had the chance this year to work on some really exciting projects, creating transgender and non-binary policies for a group of gyms, creating inclusion statements, looking at diversity policies, getting to do a number of webinars, some of those being global, training. So I look to provide that support to organizations, whilst at the same time being mindful of doing some outreach work to support young LGBT people. So within Changing Hearts and Minds, I have the Community Voices, which is made up of a number of people from the queer space. And I'm going to use the word queer. I know that some people don't like that, but that's just me saying everybody within the LGBTQIA spectrum. So when I use queer, that is referring to all of us. And those voices help me because I'm the one that has often a seat at the table. I'm the one that has a platform to speak, and their voices are not heard. So I speak with them, and when I speak, it's those voices that are coming through. And then the profits made, a significant amount of my profits are given to charities who are supporting those most vulnerable in the LGBTQIA space.
Wow, Lee, I know that's just even a summary of all the amazing work you do, but thank you for sharing that. It's just so amazing and important, the work that you're doing. And, you know, that advocacy piece that you've described and using your platform to be the voice for everybody is brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. And congratulations on 1 year as well.
1 year. Happy birthday.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about LGBT plus History Month and the origins of it?
So it was created in the UK in 2005. I believe we were the first country to have LGBT History Month, though perhaps the US might have done something similar sooner. But certainly 2005 was the first year that we had it. And it sort of ties in with the abolishment of Section 28. For those that don't know, so that was a piece of legislation that was introduced in 1988, which banned the use of anything that related to LGBTQIA within schools, and was deemed that sort of language to be disrespectful to families and actually what a family should look like. So it was a piece of legislation that really impacted education. I remember being a boy at school when that was put in place. And it's significant to LGBT History Month because one of the tasks for that piece of legislation was that all reference to queer folk in schools had to be taken out. So literally you had people sat in school libraries going through books, book after book, tearing out pages or pulling out books where there was a reference to a queer person. And it was just, there was no conversations allowed. So it all sort of stems from that. There's a couple of people that created LGBT History Month who previously were doing out schools, and it sort of works in conjunction with that. So it's around education, raising awareness. It is really needed. I know people might think, why do you need to have LGBT History Month? You have Pride. As a queer person, my history has been eradicated, really. It's often not mentioned in anything. It's either been removed or it was never written about because it was illegal or frowned upon. And if it has been written about, it's been written about by cis straight men, looking at it through their lens, not looking at it through the lens of somebody from the queer communities. So we have a history like everybody else does. It's like, you know, when you hear that people say, oh, trans and non-binary, it's just fashionable, pronouns, it's fashionable, will come and go. It's absolutely not true, because with trans people, non-binary people have been around since the beginning of time. It's like with colonization that a lot of countries were forced to have sexuality made illegal. So the history needs to be told. People need to be aware of it. We've had centuries and centuries of being suppressed, of being living in fear of our lives, of being persecuted. And so there's been leaps forward in countries. There's still countries, around 70 countries throughout the world, where it's illegal still to be homosexual, and people are actually sought out. The troubles now, like with Uganda, making it illegal. The horror stories of young people being sought out and then imprisoned, castrated, sentenced to life, going through awful surgeries, conversion therapy. So it's still happening in the world right now. And within the UK, hate crime has risen to an all-time high. Reported hate crime for LGBT people is up 47%. For the trans community, it's even higher. It's 58%. So there's more hatred still coming through. Even though there's people that are really jumping to our side and being allies, I think sometimes they know how to be an ally. They don't know how to do that. And History Month is looking at remembering significant achievements, remembering our predecessors, what they've achieved for us, actually what they had to sacrifice to get those achievements, and then to look ahead. So what next? Like what do we need to do? And you know, things change, and things that were important to older generations are not as important to Gen Zs. And you know, for example, I think we were just speaking before, like the fight for same-sex marriage, which was a huge achievement. But how important is that now to Gen Zs? A lot of Gen Zs who are not queer don't plan to get married. So it's kind of like the whole look at marriage has changed and shifted anyway, and the type of relationships people want. But what challenges do they face now in their life? And that's going to then look at discussions in years to come when they have History Month chats like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just huge, isn't it, when you put it like that? There's been so much positive movement, but there's also been all of that, regression and oppression, which sadly is still going on. But absolutely important to look at the positives as well. So it really is sort of parallel there, isn't it? Interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, I saw some stats that said that, this is sort of bringing it back into the workplace, that 1 in 5 LGBT plus individuals have been the target of negative comments at work, which is really sad. And then also, that apparently a third feel that they have to hide who they are. And there's all that stuff around, that they're not going to have any psychological safety at work. They're not going to feel comfortable or be able to bring their authentic self to work if they're feeling that way.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be great to take a look at, what employers can do in order to support these individuals in the workplace to ensure that, it is inclusive and ensure that people don't feel that way. So are there any themes, Lee, of things that you think are coming up at the moment that employers are doing more and can be doing more?
I certainly think within organisations now, the networking groups that they have are successful in helping those that currently work in that workplace feel more included, as long as it's their agenda that is pushed back up to the board and not the board's agenda pushed down onto them. So I know those groups are really powerful. It gives people a chance to come together, especially if you look at intersectionality, as opposed to just keeping people in one specific group. Actually, myself, I'm someone that sits in a number of different protected characteristics and ticks a lot of boxes for a future employer. So intersectionality needs to look at the challenges that come within everybody's own unique journey. So that I feel that has definitely helped organisations to start to hear the voices of its staff. But I think what they could do is look at actually pushing that out to outside of their business. Because if you're thinking about recruitment, what message are you giving to potential candidates and applicants? And if you're just showing them videos of how nice it is to work here, how meaningful is that to someone that's Gen Z? They want to see what good you're doing for their communities. So getting involved in the grassroots. I mean, I'm fortunate that I do this work and I write these policies, but also my world is surrounded by people from minority groups. I'm supporting people day in, day out, who are most vulnerable. And I think that organizations need to get up and get out and interact more with people, because the people I meet are at the direct end of discrimination. They are receiving it. They feel it. They don't feel particularly included. So organizations that, for me, if an organization thinks, okay, well, we're going to show that we're diverse, so we'll hire people that don't look like us, but those people still think like them, that still went to the same universities. How diverse is that? And, you see all these stats around diverse workforces being the most productive, the highest performers, but that's only when you hire people that don't think like you, because it's having a team of people who've had different life experiences, that think differently, that want to debate and discuss, that come up with new solutions and new ideas. When you just bring in people that don't look like you, but were privileged enough to come from a middle-class family, go to a red brick university, those struggles, and not to take their struggles away from them, but they're very different to somebody who's come from, say, generational poverty, or somebody that's always had to have their own back because they've been part of the care system. So it's kind of looking at diversity through a much wider lens, and organizations, I think, need to get better at actually getting out and looking at how they can give back and support, rather than just having these nice networking events with canapes and cocktails, which are great, but do something a bit more meaningful as well. I teach in my training about performative allyship, which is when people will just like or share posts, so trying to say, look, I support the LGBTQIA communities, but unless there's something meaningful people behind that post. You know, if you're taking an action like giving to a charity, doing some volunteer work, signing a petition, writing to your MP, then it's actually probably just validating yourself more than it is the queer people that you believe you're showing an alliance with. So, and that goes to organisations. I think you have to do more than be performative. You have to get out there and make meaningful actions.
That's such good advice, isn't it? I think, you know, a lot of organisations think they're doing enough. Maybe actually outwardly might appear more like they're ticking the box, but they're not actually actively engaging. So that's a really useful piece of advice, I think.
And that will definitely then help in terms of attracting that whole thing around your EVP and taking that to market. When you're giving back to communities and showing the good work that you do, that is definitely going to attract applicants now. It's top of their lists in terms of, I mean, I'm speaking to you, but you know better than I do now as to like what candidates look for in a new employer. And it's less like when you and I would work together years ago where it was predominantly how much money they could earn, what career prospects there were in the location were kind of like three big drivers. Now it's about how that organisation is perceived externally, what they're doing for the communities, how they give back, what the candidates can get involved in that is also alongside the work. So there's huge amounts to consider that will not only do good for these communities, but also ensure that you have best applicants as well coming through to your business.
Yeah, it's so true, because the drivers of job seekers has changed so much, hasn't it? And even, you know, if you're not part of the LGBT community, you're more likely these days, I believe, to be an ally, and therefore it's going to be important to you that your employer or your potential employer is doing the right things. Yeah. And I was wondering, Lee, actually, if you've got any stats on how many people these days identify as LGBT plus compared to maybe 10 years ago.
Well, I mean, 10 years ago, there was no records, but the last census that went out for the first time did actually ask for details of sexuality and gender. I don't think it's 100% accurate, because a lot of people, as you said earlier, are afraid to come out at work, but they're also afraid to come out at home. So they're not always being their authentic selves, and they're not going to tick a box to confirm that they are queer. But the census indicated that I think it's around 3.4% of the UK population is queer, and 1.8% were transgender. So, but that was what was just declared. So I think it's much more than that. But I think if you look at that in terms of your workplace, so if you've got 100 employees, you know that 3 of them are going to be out gay and queer, and then you're going to have others that are not out but are still there with the same struggles. Is such a small group, and unless you've got allies, even putting the 3 people onto a podium to have their say, which is essential, if there's no allies there, it's not really going to have much impact. So it's about creating allies that will also amplify those voices.
And stats that I've seen show that so many more people, especially in Gen Z, would consider themselves an ally or an advocate. Even if they're not part of that community, they definitely are an ally. And therefore, it just goes to show, doesn't it, the importance of it for employers if they want to continue to attract and retain people now and in the future. Their policies are going to be getting better.
I think so. And just to your point there, so a non-minority allies group is another way that people can actually get involved. Though themselves are not from a minority group, they want to be an ally, so they'll come together to discuss how they can be better allies, and then interact with the networking groups that are for minority people. So I think that's a good option for organisations to have as well.
Yeah, to encourage and support the allyship as well. Yeah, I think that sounds great. Thank you. Now, we are aware that there's a bit of a theme around healthcare and what employers maybe can be doing better around healthcare for these communities. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so this year's History Month theme is celebrating our contribution to the medical world, healthcare, with lots of unsung heroes. And I think just to kind of look at how that could then translate to businesses and what you could be considering this month. So LGBT people are disproportionately affected by mental ill health. 1 in 8 young LGBT QIA people have had suicidal thoughts. It's even higher for the trans community. And so there's a whole range of different depressions, disorders, anxieties that queer people have through generations of shame and guilt, and being made to feel like they're an outsider or feeling like they're an outsider. So I think 2 things from that is looking at making sure your organization has the right support for mental ill health, and that is accessible to all, that it's promoted, that your queer workforce are aware of it. And then inclusion as well. Like, let's get rid of that outsider syndrome, make everybody feel like they're an insider and part of your business. And then other healthcare issues, just being considerate to changes now in terms of like families. And so looking at maybe your contracts around inclusive language, having a review to make sure it's not referring to like your husband, your wife. Just little things that can make somebody already reading one of your documents feel that they're not included. And then giving thought as well to your healthcare insurance provider, your life assurance providers, because a lot of them will just not even acknowledge transgender people. So if you've chosen to go with an insurance provider that doesn't acknowledge transgender people, again, what message does that give to them? Life assurance, like, is that something that's available for all? I know a lot of life assurance companies will not assure somebody that's living with HIV. Or they may charge additional premiums for that. So what is your business doing? Do you promote the fact that, you know what, we'll suck it up and we'll pay additional amounts so that everybody's included in this life assurance, regardless of their status? Does your healthcare provider help with trans people and ones that are doing going through gender confirmation surgery? Would your healthcare support with that? So the question's really to go and have a look into to make sure that everybody's health is considered, I think
that's so important. And these are things that employers just might not have even thought about. I think your point about inclusive language in documents, that's such a key thing, isn't it? And actually just having a look and doing a bit of an audit and making sure it's all updated to be inclusive, that's so important. And going back, Lee, to what you shared about the sort of the mental health statistics and the disproportionate, ratios there of people feeling suicidal or having other mental health challenges. Do you think maybe an employee assistance program is enough, or do you think employers need to do more?
I think the bit around inclusion and allyship will help for those that have suffered with mental ill health, and it's a way to tackle those illnesses by having a really inclusive workplace. So when somebody comes into work, and this is not just for queer people, this is for everyone who has mental ill health, but maybe looking at ways to support someone at work. So, is it really essential that everybody turns on their camera when they're in a Teams meeting? You know what that person looks like. Do you really need to see them? Because somebody might be suffering that day and not want to turn on their camera, but we still want to work. Just thinking of ways in which you can be flexible. So if somebody is having a day where it's a dark place, that they don't have to lie and say, I've got a cold, that they can actually talk about their mental ill health, and the employer is supportive of that and recognizes that is something that can happen, and there'll be days when people will feel unwell because of mental ill health. So I guess just like being supportive, aside from offering the professional signposting and setting up helplines. Mental health first aiders are really important. But then the inclusion piece. So making sure everybody's educated on working inclusively, on allyship, and coming together really as a big team.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, having mental health first aiders in place is something organisations can put in place quite simply. There's some great courses available, and I know there's so many people in organisations who want to take on that role. So that's just a really quick thing that employers can do to help with that. Absolutely. I'm just going to go to the poll in the chat quickly before we carry on.
I can't see with my eyesight.
Oh, sorry, Lee, I'll read for you. We've had a lovely message from Emma, and Emma's just saying how she's singing your praises, Lee. She's saying that she's extremely lucky to have worked with you, and how you've worked tirelessly to help their organisation to evaluate how inclusive they are, and also just to have a look to help their diverse team to feel like they can be their authentic self. So that's just a really nice somebody about the work that Lee and Changing Hearts and Minds do. So I thought I'd share that.
Oh, thank you, Emma, who's an absolute ally and somebody that really does want to drive inclusion and equality.
Thank you, Emma. That was so lovely to see. And I've also noticed that a few people have put their hand up to speak. So I just wanted to say the best way to do that is to pop something in the chat function. The chat function is the best way. So if you are still keen to ask any questions or share anything, please do put a note in the chat, and we can read it out and add that to the discussion as well. Great. So moving on, Lee, I know that there are some organisations that are still using sort of more traditional and language around things like they talk about maternity leave or whatever, or paternity leave, and also various policies around time off and things like that. So have you got anything to share around that at all?
So there's no real legislation around same-sex maternity leave. I mean, the birth mother will as any mother will have the same statutory maternity rights. I think just embracing the fact that families are changing and that there will be same-sex couples that are having children, and that might mean an increase in your workforce of people that are adopting or choosing surrogacy. And are you being supportive of that and giving some maybe additional time off for parents who have the surrogate mother attending antenatal or trips to the hospital? Are you giving those parents in your workforce time to go with them? The same with adopting. Just looking at making sure that your policies promote inclusion for different ways now of having children, and not just it being around the actual birth mother.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? So essentially looking at all sorts of parental support and potential parental support and whatever it might be that people need, having a look at that and trying to be as supportive as possible to make it inclusive. Some really good points there, because like you say, things look in all sorts of different ways these days, don't they? So
they do. And it will continue to change and to grow and evolve. The traditional family model will always be there, but there's variations. Now, it doesn't have to look like it did, and it won't do, because new generations look at things differently.
Absolutely. Okay. In terms of the, going back to the sort of support around wellbeing, we've talked a bit about mental health, we've talked a bit about health policies. What else do you think employers can be considering when it comes to just general support of the wellbeing?
So if we go back to, I think, maybe thinking of promoting well-being and healthcare, just we've spoken a bit maybe about how to give support to people that do have mental health, but maybe looking at preventative measures, getting involved, like gym membership. Is one of your benefits? Do you have gym membership? Are you encouraging people to actually get out to exercise? Events, thinking about when you organise work events, does that still evolve around having a drink? There is a disproportionate amount of queer people that have had drink and drug addiction problems. Again, that's a way of coping with shame and guilt. So they might not necessarily want to go to the pub and stand and have drinks. So like what other activities, and I'm not saying to stop that at all, but what are you doing in addition to that so that everybody can come together and do something, which could be volunteering or doing something meaningful with communities?
Yeah, just an interesting point that, because I think this inclusive social events comes up a lot actually for various reasons, in fact, and I think employers are really keen to get ideas for what they can do. So maybe we'll do a little bit of a white paper on that, of how we can make more inclusive social events that aren't always centered around going to the pub, for people that want to do something a bit different.
And then of course, the celebrating of real predominant celebrations throughout the ED&I calendar, getting staff involved, looking at initiatives, so just driving inclusion throughout, really, and encouraging people to remain feeling supported and happy. That can also be tied into their personal growth and development. Have they got resource for training, for learning, well-being with physical, but also do they have access to look at things like meditation? And if not, maybe offering that again when you're considering your benefits. Just really ways of remaining positive. I think everybody in the world right now has been through so much with the pandemic, the cost of living spike. I think it's 1 in 4 people have at least lost their job once. There's just like constant turmoil. And so it's not just LGBT people, your entire workforce really needs to try and maintain a healthy mindset. So thinking of well-being for all. But I think with regards to your minority groups, asking them, what do you want?
Yes.
A good starting point. Never presume that you think, I've got my friend who lives down the road, he's gay, and I know he likes to do this all the time at the weekend, so I'm going to bring this into work and we'll do that. It's thinking of that, avoiding that stereotyping and actually asking your minority groups, maybe if you've got the networking groups, what would you like to do?
It's such an obvious one, but such a good one. I think you get HR teams sitting there thinking, what can we do? Why don't we do this? And actually, it's quite simple. You just need to ask the questions, don't you? And poll people and find out and get the ideas that way.
Well, with technology now, that's exactly it. You can just send an email with some drop downs and you can choose which activity would you most like to do from the list attached. And then you get a good feel of what people how they're feeling and what they want to do.
Yeah, and it's nice then because it's sort of for the people, by the people, and everyone feels like they've had a say and a voice, which means they're more likely to engage in it. So all positive. And I just wanted to go back.
I was going to say one quick thing as well is always celebrate the successes of your minority groups. So if you've got queer people in your business that are performing well, really actually storytell that, because we don't often get positive visualization. A lot of the time it's negative, especially if you look at the media, the press. We rarely get good news stories about queer people. It's always, this queer person's done this or this trans person's done that, and that's one person out of millions. But so if we organizations actually share to their entire workforce, this queer person has achieved this or done this, or it then changes their perception of, it might change that stereotyping, that bias, but also as well for anybody that's not out and queer, they suddenly have a role model, they have somebody to inspire them, that they can even then maybe have mentoring sessions with, to help them with their journey and coming out and just performing well at work. So I think representation is a really big part of having History Month to celebrate moving forward, more representation. Absolutely.
And I love that, because there are so many things that we could be celebrating. There are so many positive things, but like you say, it's not necessarily getting talked about enough. So I think that's a really good and another really simple thing for employers to put in place. Brilliant. And I love what you said earlier as well about sort of prevention, and actually working to help people feel supported and minimize mental health challenges rather than deal with them when they come, which obviously we need to be doing as well. But that prevention piece is really important. And you've given us some lovely ideas of things that employers and HR teams can put in place. I'm just going to go to the poll, actually, just for a bit of an update on where we're at with that. So the question again was, how well does your workplace support LGBT plus colleagues? And so we've got here 57% are saying we're doing great. We've got 42% saying we've got work to do, and 0% actually saying we're just getting started. So it's nice to see that everyone's already on the journey, and there's, the majority of people in the room are confident that they're doing a great job. And it's really nice to see that, a lot of them are saying, we know we need to do some work and are interested in looking at what they can do. And that leads me to think about, does Changing Hearts and Minds do such a thing as offering an audit for organisations to see how well they're doing with these things? Yeah,
absolutely. An audit, general, a consultancy slot to just, if there's key issues that organisations are having particular challenges with, or they want to do better, or they need some guidance on. So just an hour of consultation, and then to map out what actions we could take together to help achieve that.
Brilliant. And that might be anything from, is our wording in our contracts inclusive, to, are our events, more than just a tick box, and anything like that?
Yes, and statements, policies, training, in terms of like allyship as well. Like, are we doing enough? Do we have allies in the business? Do the allies know what's expected of them? Are they stepping up to the name ally, or is there work to be done?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we speak to employees, it's so often that they want to get involved in these things, but they don't necessarily feel that there's a way that they can. So I guess it's about HR and people and culture teams signposting what's available and, encouraging people and letting them know they can get involved.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm just going to see if there's anything else in the chat. It'd be great to see if there's any other questions or comments that anybody wanted to share, or any questions that you might have for Lee at this stage.
I don't know with the chat if it's possible for me to just say, so I think you gave a really high number of people that are doing great for supporting queer people, which is fantastic. So I just wondered, from the 58%, what are they doing for LGBT History Month? Like, how are they raising awareness, educating the workforce, celebrating their queer folk? Like, what are those 58% doing throughout February?
Really good question. I'm just adding a little note in the chat so everyone can see where it is, and saying to feel free to share. It'd be lovely to hear, wouldn't it, what everyone's doing? And that's the nice thing about these communities, because you get to hear ideas from what your peers are doing. So if anyone wants to share, that would be great. Just pop that in the chat there.
One thing that employers can encourage the workforce to do, or even arrange a team outing, but the Queer Museum in King's Cross, St Pancras, it's only a small venue. It's free, so you're not going to incur any costs. But it's a great place to go and have a little walk around and see the struggles that queer people have been through. A lot of our history is displayed through visual art and posters and paintings. So I think, it's a good starting point would be a trip to Queer Britain.
Queer Britain, it's called, is it? Fantastic. Yeah, that sounds like such a nice idea. Get people to sort of see and get that awareness raised. That's fantastic. Yep. Excellent. So I haven't got any other comments in the chat at the moment. So before we close, Lee, is there anything else that you think it would be useful to share?
I would just ask that everybody that's here, as a call to action, if you're in HR yourself, but if not, then ask your HR people to do so, is to have a review of your benefits. Are they inclusive? If you do offer private healthcare and life assurance, who is that healthcare provider? Are they supportive of healthcare to trans people? Is the life assurance for everyone? And look at, I think that would just, given the topic of this year's LGBT History Month has been healthcare. So just going back to your organisations, and the call for action is just some little things to check that it's inclusive what you have, and that there is a helpline or some signposting if you can't afford as a business to actually provide that, but signposting to the right support groups for your LGBTQIA people.
Brilliant. That's such a good idea. And like you say, even if you've got limited budget, there are resources, aren't there, that you can at least just signpost to people. That's such a good point. Brilliant. Well, Lee, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to hear about the amazing work you're doing and to highlight these, really important and powerful issues. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for giving me a chance to come speak. It's gone by so quickly.
I know, it always does. It always does.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.